Welcome back. Now we're going to talk about the crazy eight. And what does that mean? Well, the crazy eight is a pattern, as you may know. We all have patterns in our relationships, especially when we first get together and we get our needs met. You know, we looked at how you get all those chemicals needs met. You get high once you first meet someone. They're going through your brain and they're making you almost addicted to that person. So the crazy eight tends to happen as we move on from that part of the relationship. And it's a cycle that we go through within that relationship. It's a way that we still get our needs met. And unfortunately, in many relationships, we meet our needs in the wrong way. So instead of meeting our needs by expressing love or feeling love, we tend to look for other ways to get other people's attention, the other person's attention. For example, if you have any children or any kid, you would know that sometimes they act up and they do things because they want attention. Because we've learned since we're little kids sometimes that if we don't get our way, maybe if we have a temper tantrum, maybe if we scream, maybe if we do this, we get our needs met. And as adults, there's also needs that we get met through that process. In fact, they're very addicting. Whether it's anger, whether it's adrenaline that we get from that, whether it's sadness and then being built up. There's a saying that there's nothing better than the makeup part in a relationship. So people think that they fight and then they make up because that's the good part of the relationship when people have to make up. So it's taking past that. So let's look at the crazy eight real quick. And the crazy eight is in the stages where in the middle, you might find your happiness, for example. And that's where you meet some of those needs. But what happens is you can't stay in that state of happiness where that need is being met. So what do people do? They go from anger. They might shift into happiness. Sadness, happiness, anger, and happiness, sadness. And this might be what they call the crazy eight, because you go in that cycle over and over again and waste to meeting your needs. So what are the benefits of anger? Well, there are many benefits that people get from anger. One, there's an adrenaline rush. You get that chemicals that come in, but also you get the person's attention possibly. Some people feel empowered by anger. For example, I had a person that I was working with that started telling me how he liked it when they would blow up. He always said that his, wife always had all the control. All of a sudden they would have a big fight and he hated fighting. But when he blew up, he would feel empowered and he would tell me that and he would start smiling. And you should see, when I blow up, I get what I want. It's like, and then he had this big grin in his face. And I told him, hold on, so do you like arguing and fighting so you can feel empowered? And he's like, no, why would you say? I was like, because you're smiling the whole time where you're explaining how it felt when you blew up and how you felt in control and empowered and how you felt like you were directing the conversation and how all of a sudden you were being heard. So people get their needs met. And once he figured out I called him out, he admitted to it. He said, okay, maybe I do. So if you call people out sometimes, they will be honest and real and tell you what some of their needs are when they get to that place. And we all might have a need that we might meet with certain emotions. So it's coming to that understanding that there are needs being met, but there's other ways as well. So what about sadness? What do we get out of sadness? Sometimes when we don't get the person's attention, what happens when we feel down? We feel sad, they start crying. All of a sudden the person feels empathy. So instead of being angry with you or instead of acting like they don't care if they see a person crying, it's a human nature to feel empathy. So the person might come to you, might ask, okay, let's talk. I'm sorry, let's don't cry, or whatever it may be, or they might give you a hug so you might feel connection. And that's the problem, that there's connection in these cycles. So a person might feel anger and sadness, but at the same time, all they're doing is connecting, where happiness is a much, much better connection, but it's easier to connect through anger. It's easier sometimes to connect through sadness because we might know what to do to connect through anger. Because through anger, we can connect instantaneously. If I scream at someone or if I'm angry at someone, I say something that gets their attention, I'm connecting instantaneously. Whereas with sadness, I can also connect instantaneously. If I start crying, if I start moping, I might get attention. I might have that connection, that intimacy, somebody trying to console me. So there's a lot of power behind those emotions. But the problem is that those emotions do not build the relationship. Those emotions do not build a solid foundation of an enlightened relationship. Doesn't help the relationship grow. In fact, what it does, it deteriorates it, because the more that we meet our emotions through angers and our need through anger and sadness, the more we have to do it to get that need met. Because people get tired of the sadness and people get tired of the anger. But what tends to happen, that's why people fluctuate, because if you stay in anger all the time, you're never going to win anything. If you stay in sadness all the time, you might not win anything at all either. So what people do is that they fluctuate, but eventually, even with that fluctuation, your needs cannot be met fully. So you have to be in that happiness stage. And actually, when you make up through sadness, you feel happy because you feel connected. When you feel that anger and you let go of that anger and people connect and they connect again and they say sorry for screaming or whatever they did, they find happiness too because they feel connected then. They feel like people care. Another example, I had a young lady that was in my office at one point, and she was telling me about the relationship. She was telling me how her husband doesn't love her. And I said, how do you know? He said, because we get in our arguments and I'll start screaming, I'll even curse at him, and he doesn't even say anything back. He just ignores me, acts like he doesn't care. He keeps watching TV. And I said, so how do you know he doesn't love you then? So because if he loved me, he would scream back. And I know that because he wouldn't be able to control himself emotionally and he would scream back at me. And that's how I knew that he was emotionally connected. So he's not emotionally connected. And the problem is that she grew up watching The Crazy Eight. So her understanding of connection was through screaming. All of a sudden you scream, the person screams back, they're emotionally attached, he loves me or she loves me. So it's a bad way of getting your emotional needs met. Again, it doesn't do anything but destroy the relationship long term. That relationship will not last if it's based on this. So how can you interrupt it? Well, the thing with interrupting is that you have certain, when we teach communication skills, we'll go over some of those things. Those are interrupters if you know what you're going to do. If you know the warning signs, which we'll go over, you'll be able to stop those things in the same way. But a lot of things with interrupting anything, any pattern, is to create awareness of it. So when you first start getting angry, and now that you have that information, it's going to be easier. And once you have the warning signs, you have communication skills, it'll be a lot easier. But this is important because once you know this, you already understand what's happening, and it'll be easier for you to control. So once you start getting angry, instead of going through the screaming and emotions and stuff like that, once you start seeing the warning signs, you can say, hold on, we need a break. Let's take a break for a couple minutes and come back and talk later. Or you might have something that you talk about beforehand. So if this happens, if we're getting angry, what things can we do? Whether it's to walk away, whether it's to write, communicate through writing. Some people find that very effective. And then coming back and communicating from some of the thoughts. Whether it's having to say the positive sandwich thing, working on some of the positive things before we get into the negative. It's a lot of different things. And the thing with anger is to catching it before it gets too explosive. There's a thing that happens when we get angry, which is this part of the brain shuts off. It's called the prefrontal lobe. And it's one thing that I help a lot of my clients and students do is to get control of that. So how do you do that? Well, you put your hand over your chest. So if you can just do that real quick. So everyone just take a second and put your hand over your chest. And if you do that and you feel your heartbeat, what will happen is that your actual prefrontal lobe starts activating your amygdala, which is your emotional side, starts easing. And that's the part that makes you kind of go cuckoo, makes you say things and do things that you don't really mean. So if you can just hold your hand over your chest for like 2 minutes, research has shown that by putting it in your heart, it reactivates that thought process. So again, with sadness, the same thing is developing. Are we getting our needs met through sadness? Are we looking for sadness to connect? So once we become that aware of that, then looking at ways that we can connect, either through compliments, either through reaching out to someone else, either through writing. When we write, we kind of release a lot of those things. We can let it go quickly. That's a great way for us to release. So finding different ways for us to interrupt when we feel in a specific state to do that. Going for a walk, being in nature, taking a bath, where we kind of relax a little bit, where we are able to tell ourselves we're not going to go there and attack our relationship. We're going to step back and do something for ourselves. whether it's watching a funny video, whatever it may be, that's going to create happiness and have you not meet needs this way. You know, I had a couple one time that had something that they did was that every time they had a hard issue and they butted heads, they would have a couple videos that would make them laugh, that they would force themselves to sit down and do it. And they always said that once they got to that point where they would sit down and watch them and laugh, it made all the other things seem minimal. And they were able to come back and have good communication and come from a different place instead of the anger. Because once you let go of those hard emotions, it's a lot easier to then connect at a deeper level. So I hope that helped.